No, the communication to its live itself is just readjusting the system's lines of travel. Now it's finding a way to process that. Known as sending track centers and direct and that and that. Every time it's already every time I review it, every time I it's already every time I review it's done. All right, so imagination coming into ocean. Thank you. Yeah, had to reconvene. All right. Internet lines, center high interferences, umbrella and screen adaptations. The open sequence lines, everything has a commanding center. This is the open frequencies or Wi-Fi interactions, right? So you guys will pick that up through modifications. All right, so where we left off in setting is the indication system all through travels of point graphs of communications and setting, right? Ceiling this, high centers of a ceiling, structure of a building, crossing angles of point lines of graph communications. High panels of its pyramid in travel communication. See? Going this way, up this way, over this way, that way, this way, and down this way, right? So there's so many ways of looking at in travel communications. All right, and then we have the center calculation, right? The center coordinate lines. Splitting lines and objects in two track centers in three directions in pi of set in sequence. Okay, and then we have to have a vector score center, calculate and modify into flux over line, directing ground centers, and that communicates sending to its console and travel, right? Comes into a pi generation screen adaptation, all right? Then basically, knowing exactly what you're doing with your facades, it processes communication system all through travel. Start to identify how you can see your faces and recognition of space and time interaction. Face recognition, looking down, right? So it opens all communications setting of 4 different panels and processes laser travel and communications. How the eyes come out in sequence, right? So they come into box frames and travel communications. Very powerful stuff in setting. See, different angles, different point centers. Then we add the center point line graph communication setting, which is the center operation system of travel. That's the center point that puts process of the frames in sequence in travel communications. All right? And then we change the direction and center calculation. Okay? And then we open the panels of communication grounds, center lines of service, powers, operation, setting, and travel. All right? So the more you get into creative cycles, it gets a lot more fun. It's just having fun itself, knowing exactly what you're doing in travel. But see, I'm not traveling. I'm already traveling. What I'm doing is changing the structure of design to creating. So when you're finished, you see the creation. But there is no finish to a story. It's ongoing existence of you just understanding what you're seeing in travel. You're constantly traveling, constantly over and over and over and over and over and over. And the more you identify that, the more it gets easier, right? The flowing recognitions, the timeline centers, the high operation sequence, high position location in its program, all direct locations of setting its surface. Knowing exactly how to communicate in high lines of performance. Remember, it's your efficacy in that communication of structure of design lines. Say it disappeared by itself. You saw it disappear. Why? Because you're not ready to see the frequencies, because you're not there yet. You're not there yet, but you've always been there. For you to process that is understand the triangulation to its system. Everything that you set in structure, you created it, which is already created. But for you to understand structure of design, and every time I do this, I'm creating. I'm creating. Okay, I'm constantly creating. So what I am creating, I come to creation. Creation is the grounds of earth. Creating is all of the space. Space is all movement. Space never stops. Space is always moving. Galaxy is always moving. Everything's moving faster. And for you to identify that, it's much easier to see that in all different angles and travel all through communication, right? And travel communications and settings, okay? But it's very powerful when you come into that setting. Different angles, different points, different graphs, different simuli, different travel. Very powerful stuff on platforms of communications. X2000 comes in, inside outline, inside travel. Okay? So, as the inner child is just having fun, your setting position is basically, if I'm already traveling, I never am thinking. There's nothing to think of. I'm just knowing exactly what I'm doing. So every time I do this, okay, that's creating. This is creating, right? This is creating. This is creating. What you've already created, you're sitting on. So you're sitting on this chair, right? So for you to identify that and what you created, you are the creation. And then you realize, I'm not sitting in a chair. The chair is now what I created myself. To get out of that is to get out of what you're not seeing, okay? You're seeing all levels of you traveling, wherever you go, right? So wherever you're going, you're creating. And what you want to see, what you see, your creation is setting in that position of what you are through creator. You're the creator of creation, of creating. So there's so many ways of looking at that, right? So if I move this structure over here, I'm creating. I do it over here, I'm creating. Any movement that I'm doing, I'm creating, because I'm already traveling. But where I travel to is through my intent. And that changes everything that you see in modifications, right? Everything that you see. But you ask yourself, it's an interesting point. I'm looking around me, but I'm also inside the system. But what is inside the system? What is operating the system itself? Space and time. So you're looking at the environment. You're looking at the longitude and latitude. So I'm looking at one perspective in one box frame, which is one window frame. But I see it in schematics, I see it in structure. You see it in architect. You guys are your own architects, you guys are your own engineer skills. Now's the time to use your tool sets that you're already interactions of. So once you start to identify these things, you start to recognize everything that you see, you created. So it doesn't matter where you go, you're going what you created. Now, to change that, you're creating and existing and evolving of what you already created. You can't change things which is fact. Okay? This is not fiction, this is fact. Science fact that you are you, but you are you in the virtual reality. Living in that aspects of your system. Okay? So that puts everything all together, structure. So if I set a box screen and two panels across lines, three centers of angles in travel communications. It doesn't look like much, right? But when you put the triangulation systems inside setting, it's really powerful stuff. I'm just using triangulation box lines. Puts all communication system off the travel, inside traction, inside and outside now, right? And basically, you can see it on all lines of graph communications. Setting lines of sequence, green centers, green circles, travel point lines of triangulation lines of position. Right? Setting different angles of triangulation, point lines of communications. So all the triangulations are creating itself, right? Moving in the same direction or moving in the opposite direction locations. Adding frames and travel in that communication system. Something that's not on the graph is now on the graph. That's creating. This is all created. That's creating, adding something new, right? So it's in the opposite directions. Sending sequence lines this way, arrows of indication going in the same lines of flux, and one arrow going this way in travel. That's creating, right? So when you guys get up in the morning, you're looking at your creation. So if you're looking at your creation, there's nothing to do. You created everything. You are the creators, right? But what you have to identify now is to get in your virtual reality of just creating and evolving and expanding yourself, coming into new things. Like, I understand the structure of what I already created, and I want to come into the creating. So the creating is coming to you, right? This is the creations, what you created, all right? Your earth. You created your earth. I'll just give you a basic understanding screen, adaptation system. That's the earth, right? That's what you created, right? So now you have to understand how calculation modifies and travel in that communication system off these settings, okay? Of what you're creating. So if you already created the earth is already in its virtual reality. It's already in its travels, in its direct state locations, right? See, the Earth is on its own system because it's in its own consciousness, its own awareness of travel, right? So what you have to start identifying, space itself has its own foundation. Everything in the virtual reality has its own foundation system. Interactions, right? So it's true to understand that, okay, if I'm all levels of what I see, which is already created, how do I get in position of creating? By letting everything go of what you aren't. Is the body. The body is not last to go, the body is the first to go. So there's nothing last in sequence until you get into your own modification system, a codification setting. I told you that before in Set Lines of Travel. Okay? Look at my eyeline centers. Look at this. Split lines of setting. There's space and time. Space, time. Window frame. Okay, look at it. Look at the antenna. Look at the communication of flux. Look how open that is. Look at the line cross. See how open that is? That's the antenna. And that's open to all lines of all communication systems. I don't need to identify myself because I know where I am, but I know who I am. I don't question anything. I don't need to question anything because I'm always been who I am. The atmospheres, the energy, the vibration, the frequencies, the harmonics, the structures. I am the empty of everything, but the mind of everything, which is nothing. And nothing is everything that you see. So when you walk in a building, you can't see the wind factors. You can't see the structured designs. You can't see this. You can't see that because you don't want to see it. That's a story. A story is a limited stat. A story is a 2-hour, 4-hour film, right? 6-hour film, a trilogy. That puts lines of trial and error in direct signals, all right? So I only know how to count to maybe 50. How to go from 50 to 0 and 0 to 50, right? So it's easy to go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 3, 5, line position, all levels, 4, line settings, 3, set location, signal location, setting, triangulation lines, and 1, setting back and forth line, communications, blast off, direct core, centers, lines, 29, 18, 8, 17, 16, 5, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. See how that was? No thinking. So it's just an ebb and flow, 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 right? So it's a constant, continuous force that keeps going in its continuous system of the internal and the external force of travel. That's all this is. And once you stand the internal and the external force, you're creating travel. Portals, stargates, setting lines of sequence. Secure line of defense, setting here, setting here, setting here, setting here. Okay, that's creating, right? If you see a structure, that's creation. You want to come to creating, you're adding things on frame of the drawing. That's creating, all right? Creating, 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 creating. Okay, see, all you're looking at around you is what you created. But for you to identify that is to know exactly where your mind is, where your mind has always been, right? The balance, the energy, the existing of your network. Been, right? That's why it's extremely important again and again is to basically codify, to encrypt your systems by binary Richard's algorithm. So the positions on Friday, when you guys come in your settings, you truly understand how to operate your system. It's all levels. I want a soliloquy, and basically I want you to tell a story, and that story is going to reveal who you aren't. So it's very important to understand that because it's an energy vibe that just releases everything. And I'd say, sir, that makes a lot more sense now. So I'm starting to identify who I am, of who I've always been, as myself. But what is myself? What is my development of myself? Well, there's nothing to develop. You've always been there. Your whole body's always been there. You've always been there. You haven't been anywhere else. But what makes it more magical, what makes it more proficient and that position of your performance, knowing exactly how to do that through the virtual of yourself, is to come into creating, because you've already created everything already into the VR system. But for you to identify that is not to identify you through a story. So this soliloquy alone is going to help you and guide you. It's going to help you and get you into release of who you are and see of who you aren't. See who you aren't. And feel and touch and taste and feel, okay, when you come into the sensory perceptions, right? You created the outer version of your systems. Well, you have to create the inner version of yourself, right? That is the connections to the setting. When it comes into self-modified, into all levels of the operation of unified set locations, a unification system of your levels, the soul itself. The soul itself is the ascension of its mastering of its communications. So there's so many ways of looking at in settings, and you start to recognize, wow, this is starting to make sense. So when I'm looking around right now, that's the space that I'm seeing longitude and latitude, and I'm only looking at frame by frame by frame by frame. But the more you look at frame, the more you see the millimeters of frames, right? So when you're looking at things, it's looking through you. It's not looking at you. It's not talking at you. It's talking to you. That's the conscious of awareness. So when you get into the telepathy, everything communicates back with you because you created it through energy, vibration, frequencies, and harmonics. You're connected and everything else is connected to you. That's what makes it beautiful. That's what makes it wonderful. For you guys to identify that is to identify everything that you have, that you created yourself. But what changes that is you coming into your intent. And once you come into your intent, you're creating things. So you're looking at, wow, how did I bring this in frame? Well, you already brought this in frame. You just identify this, but you didn't do it through a body. This is not a body. This is a metaphysical system. But what's protecting its system is what it is, just a digital pad. So you can't identify its face until you identify your facade. You have to identify each other because you basically created each other. And then you realize, well, if we created each other, that means I've always been in the virtual reality of myself. Putting you in that position locations of you being the inner child, you created something so incredibly fantastic. But what you did is what you didn't do. Okay? So in that process, try to get into the imaginations that you're a rainbow child. And the reason why I want you guys to point these things out, because I have to give you a structure, I have to give you a routine to get you out of your own structure, is to get you out of your own routine. Because you'd be very confused of what you don't understand, right? You all did this as an ongoing existence when you were rainbow children. You created a three-dimensional realm. You locked yourself in, but you allowed your thoughts and actions and emotions to take over your system. So your thoughts were not locked in a three-dimensional lines of a scale. Now understanding, and that through a communication system is mind of collaboration through its partnership. How you guys put that through an outer force, not an inner force. Okay, not internal force, an outer force communications, right? So it's the internal and the external. You guys were living the external, not the internal. So once you come into that through dogma and dharma, you have to understand where that comes in its age category. That's a separation of equal. Equal. Separation. There's no separation of anything. And that's what you guys did in modifications of manipulation yourselves. So you scrambled your settings, you put anagram interference. There's a lot of communication system highlights of service that you put your track correlation setting into a story frame. So on the test on Friday, okay, I want you guys get in position. You pick an age, any category, and set lines of travel, and tell me about what you went through as you were going through a story that isn't you, right? That's going to release everything that you thought you were and bring you more into the virtual reality that you are. Okay? So that's the test. All right. Setting lines of balance, ice centers of sequence. Now the process of the communication system has its own track centers. Getting that communication system, it's basically understanding that everything that I'm seeing is just all of its creation. But soon as I touch anything, it's creating something new. New design, new structure, new schematics, new light metaphors, new travel. Okay? You're already traveling. It's a constant, continuous force of traveling. But the more you see yourself of who you are, the more you can identify yourself where you are. Right? In your seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. There's a box, right? Setting lines of sequence, open center line positions, right? What's missing in the equation, right? The other side box and the outline sequence. There's the face, right? See? See, it comes into balance of travel. All four angles and set lines of sequence, lines of panel, processing communications. And locate grounds, set lines of triangulation system, right? Just an emoji and setting travel. Okay? Bring it back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation. So you guys were off position, location, and settings of travel. Creating communication lines of dogma and not dharma. That's how you guys separated yourself in travel communications. It's very powerful what you guys did. Living in the outer spectrum, not the inner line cycles in your system and travel. So it starts to make a lot of sense how you guys you trap yourselves, put your lines, you limit your system and stat, and position locations to your age, into separation systems, and to the female and the male polarities. So that's what was missing puzzles, is that we're in the position of female lines, at course centers and male lines, process lines, flux over screen adaptations, right? Female, line position of male. There's the polarity, right? Setting track lines, setting direct location systems, right? So you guys are living half centers of travel. That's your 12 clock. You're in a 24 clock now. And sending lines of travel communications, right? So it makes a lot more sense too, because you ask yourself, wow, so that makes a lot more sense why I keep not understanding what's going on with my system, why I feel a lot more heavy on one side, and I can't understand how to scale the boat in position to sail and travel communications in 4 settings. See the 4 lines? So we got a 4 center, a 1 sequence, and a division into X, Y, Z platform. Okay? 4-1D, D14, right? See, it's 4-1D now, okay? So try to understand this. You're coming into that, you're seeing a picture on a wall. That's creation. But if you want to change the structure of design, right, you take the 4-1D into D14. That's creating, okay? That puts position, location, and settings all through tractions, right? There it is in set positions, right? High sequence, high travels, sending communications, D14. Okay? So now you're creating, right? So you got D line centers, process lines of 1, and position lines of 4 settings. There's the codification system of coding, D14, right? So now you're seeing it's the creation, right? If you add another frame, you're now creating, right? So that puts into 4-1D, all right? Or we can do, in positions all levels, we can do a 1-4D, okay? Bracketed center location setting of coding. That's creating, okay? So understanding that is understanding how to go from 0 to 12, guys. When you're clocking your system, it gets complicated. So when I basically say when you're 1 hour on the phone, that's the earth line of creation, right? So after you get off the phone, you're now creating. So you're talking to the phone, okay, when you get in that position of creation. But when you start talking to each other, that's creating. That's Tango, Tango, Foxtrot. That's you in a continuous force of delta heading. So what changes that is how you change your frame. It's how you change your time. It's how you change your clocking. It's how you change your system. How you change geometric operation of design. How you change your coordinates. How you change your travels, right? So everything you're seeing is what you created. But you want to change the frequencies. That's creating, okay? So you have to live in the creation. That keeps you in the grounds. Because if you're not grounded through creation, you're going to be levitating off the grounds itself. So the body needs its gravitational pull. And that gravitational pull puts every location system of compressors and decompressors in settings of balance. It sets position location to a system all through travel, right? So you're here. That's what keeps you gravity. Is the earth that you're on and setting. You have to have the earth of the grounds. But you also have the earth of the center and the earth of operation setting to its atmosphere, right? So those 12 chakras are earth of 2 panels of operation screens. Okay, so you got 3 centers, process of communications, right? Split lines of anomaly, set position of your primer, right? Process over, process sequence, process grounds, process line calculation setting to its pyramid. Then your inline center, outline sequence, platforms in communication of 45 angles, and direct signal lines of ground settings. The high line sequence to a system of the travel. Okay? Inside and outside travel. Right? So, understanding the aspects of you, astral projections, astral connections to your energetic domes, comes into the platforms at XD1000 and 144 flat. The process of communication comes into set positions. Now, while you guys have crop circles are, we got into the basic grounds, but we need to go to higher line frequencies and set lines of travel because it's all position location and code weaving. Directing centers, lines of communication. Code weaving is this, okay? It's stitching wires of communications grounds and electrical line interference. So it's like pulling the strings, but overlapping the sequence. It's like tying your own shoes, huh? Or anything, playing the banjo, you know, the strumming the system or the guitar, stringing the set position location system. So as you're doing this, right? To play guitar is understand the guitar through frequency. Everything has its voice pattern. It's a connection system to energetic force lines that puts a communication system to your brain convergent line count relates to your light metaphors that puts all position locations in balance and set position of travel. All through track correlations of balanced communications and settings, right? Okay, so the process lines indicate system of flux. It's lines of ground centers, high lines of surface of travel. 45 line angles and travel communications. Okay, you start to see more lines of communication coming in attractions, right? So that's basically what it is. So when you're looking around, guys, you're just looking at the creation, but you're constantly traveling, just existing and evolving and expanding, and that's all you're doing now. So we're in that process right now where the virtual reality is coming to yourself now. And more you identify that, the more you release that, the more you see yourself. It's more powerful when you basically put yourself into your own soliloquies and know exactly what you aren't. The story frame that you thought you were was never you in a living signal. The process that you were in positions of was always you in the virtual reality that you've always been in. It puts everything with cases of balance and track communications. All through systems, all through setting. All right? Okay, 16 lines of scale. Get into your imaginations how you see numbers, letters, shapes, and symbols, right? Just have fun with it. 16 equals triangulation symbol. But what does it identify? It doesn't identify anything until you come into frame. Window frame, track frame, communication frame, CPU frame. What does 16 equals triangulation? What does that mean? Doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but I know what it means to me. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me, what I see, right? So once you understand what that is, it's kind of like you're looking at the numbers already, but when you want to change that, you're creating. Change that, you're creating. Change that, you're creating, all right? You're finished that, that's creation. Very simple. So I understand that what the triangulation is, right? Triangulation lines of sequence, downshift lines of anomaly. Sets 2-point graphs and 2-point lines of atoms in rotation surface and travel in-point communications. All right, so the more you see yourself of imagination that you are, rather seeing the imagination that you aren't. You're never in something, you always are something. So you actually are the game that you're playing of yourself. You're trying to understand the game you are, not the game you're in. The game that you're in locks your system in dimension of space and time. It locks you into 3 dimension, 5 dimension, 7th dimension, 12th dimension. And every time you get up in the morning, that's what you lock yourself into. And that's a story that you will keep going that limits your stat. Okay, that changes the docket. The docket is the file. So what we have to understand how to put that in point view is understanding how to use that in that set position to understand you through attractions. And all communication system, all through setting. Okay? So once you understand what this is, the XC1000 comes here in travel, right? Looks at it at the center operation of the triangulation. And then it picks it up. It picks it up. So nobody understands what you're doing in travel. So it doesn't stay on the grounds. It has the XC1000, they're distributors. They are the set of the simulation system. They are the import, the export. They are the entry points. They are the exit points. They are the mapping sequence. They are the structured division lines. They are the coordinates. They are the ones that platitude divisions. So what their job is, everything has a job. You have a job, right? That's the job of you understanding creating, not through creation. I don't want anybody to get too confused in that setting, right? Because what you've already created is done. But the body now has to come into the virtual reality of what it really is and seeing what it really isn't, is everything around you through perspective and how you see it through perception, right? So once you understand the schematics, you have to understand that the reason why the XC1000s come in is the fact what happens with the structure of the design it can't touch ground and frequency because you're a higher point of frequency, and it affects the grounds of everybody that's not in setting through its ascension. So you can't put frequencies on the ground and set lines of 15,000 years of structures set position your primer, and for humanity to understand what that is in travel, right? You can't have a 5,000 sequence lines of a structured design and platted to its position on the earth line because it puts all communication and confusion to everybody else in travel, right? You can't put a design line structure in individual locations to your primer and expect answers in line communication system of your travel communications of 12,000 settings. So it's all about understanding you, knowing exactly what you're doing through your timeline and your position, location, your attractions. This is all signal location, your systems. But truly how to identify that puts everything location of balance, right? So again, everything that you're seeing is already created. You did that. You are the particles, you are the atoms, you are the molecules. You're everything and much more. So putting yourself into something that you're not is limiting you. Putting something that you always are is volume in you and freedom and sovereignty. So stop getting in position of creating until you understand what you created. Okay? That's what you have to come in positions of. Because if you can identify that everything you brought in through attractions, how are you going to be able to identify yourself and how you created it through your mind of imagination, through the virtual reality? Everything is virtual. Anything structure, the building, 3 centers of travel, directing ground centers of surface. You see that. That's a structure of a building. Right? But if you want to change the frequencies, now you're adding frames. See? Now you're creating a frame. Right? And when you're doing that, the XC1000s comes in. They have to come in because now you're creating, and you have to be careful what you're doing now because you're setting different frequencies. And you're changing timelines of anomaly. You're changing the part of accelerations of time that changes everything in its metric meters of scale that's already in creation. So you have to be very careful of what you do through your simulator, to your simulations, and how you bring these things in through its intent. It obturates the set location of the system and puts obsolete line core sends absolution and direct chords send it to your imagination core. Puts lines of all communication system and travel in that communication grounds that highlights the surface and travel, right? So when you're creating, this is what comes in. XC1000s come in. You see what you've done. Looks amazing. Checks and balances. Picks it up. Right? And takes it. Takes it to the moon base. Right? And stores it. So it's like cleaning shop. Right? Until you guys know how to identify not just your virtual realities that you are and what you live in is a constant continuous flow. You have to understand the controlling of frequencies when you're bringing these things in by creating, not what you did through creation. When you're creating, you're changing the frequencies of what you created. So that's why we have the XC1000s come in. Now, XC1000s is just a platform of X-ray. They're illumination grounds, illumination teleportation vehicles. They're very powerful. And once you understand frequencies and once you understand the virtual reality that you always are in, everything starts making sense. You start to recognize these things. I'm not in the game, I am the game. So I am in the controlling mechanism of myself now. And everything I see around me, I did create, but I did it in a virtual reality that I always am in. And once you identify your virtual reality as who you are, everything around you starts making sense. And then you stop complaining about this and you start figuring out what that is, and analyzing what that is. And basically, wow, so if I did create all this, what do I do next? Nothing. There's nothing for you to do. Now that's where the body gets confused because the body doesn't know where it is. So the body has to let go of what it isn't, the body itself. We don't just live in the imagination worlds, guys. We are the imaginations of everything that we see. For you to process that, our bodies are not here. Right? Just because you see me doesn't mean you see me. The real me is not here. And then you basically see how you want to see that in attractions, how we see in perspective, how we see in perception, is how we see things through perspective. I see things in a different perspective, you see things in a different perspective. But there's no challenge, there's no commitment, there's no judging at any level in that positions, right? You're just judging yourselves, which means that you're not controlling your system. And if you're not controlling your system, everything around you is going to start controlling you. Now coming into that lines comes an all communication of glitching, Mandela, butterfly effects, twilight zone, Doctor Strange, putting you into vertigos and location system. So everything I'm giving you is already set and designed, right? So I'm not giving you creating. I'm giving you exactly what you are seeing, what you've already done through creation, put you into all of what you are here for, is just come into just creating. Because you're already in the virtual self. So the confusing part is not realizing the actual body is not here or there, but it's traveling everywhere. But it always has its foundation. Everything in this virtual system, everything has to have a foundation. How to communicate yourself, that's the foundation of its own system. Hotel, golf, everything has to have a house. Every avatar has its own house. So, but you have to ask yourself, what's the house made of? Well, first off, my earth is plasma. And second off, it's all through the mind, imagination, schematics. It's all through creating set positions. And that's where you come into the terminology of it setting through high centers. It puts all communication system through high tech. Know exactly, wow, I'm just here to understand the virtual reality of who I am. And realize I'm just here to come into creating. So when you come into creating, then you start to manifest new things. But you do it with no expectation, which comes into expectation. So when you have expectation, you're going to bring things in. That's over pi. That's what it is. It's way beyond precog. Precog is predetermined what you already saw. Cognitives is putting lines of communication, setting what you are new in position of, just creating, not what you already know of who you always are, is yourself. But how you see yourself is perspective of how you see everything in generation or anything in modifications. This opens all lines, all communication system, all through travel. So pointing anything that you see, bring it in frame. You know, bring in the numbers at one line, 8 sequence, and to 12 track centers. Where's the clock in that? You know, and 20 lines of frames into, let's add lines of 12, line signals, offline centers, 12 line center inference, 12 ground positions, 2 measures and scales and triangulation, process lines into indication system, all through vertigo, process calculation screens, adaptation and settings of travel. See, it's fun, right? Now, if I change the intent, now it's coming into manifestation. Okay? And like I said, if it comes to manifestation, the XC1000s come in because basically you have to know what your frequencies you're sending out. You're transmitting and receiving information. But when you're basically in creating, you're transmitting information from a different level, a different frequency, a different time. And it's very important you understand what you're putting out is what you get back. And what you get back is frequency itself. But for you to identify that, did you do it in the 5,000 error? Did you do it in the 10,000 error? Did you do it in 25,000 error? Did you do it in the 500,000 error? You know, you set a frequency at a 500,000 level that humanity will never understand. And that changes all aspects of everybody through their ascension. So it's very important what you're doing, okay? Know exactly how to connect to yourself is to see yourself through frequencies and understand how to identify that to your universe. And everything you look around is looking at you, is looking through you. And you realize that, wow, I want something to have a communications with myself. If I can have a communication with myself, I understand what I'm going around in positions. I understand I'm not just the creations of everything. I created everything of its anomaly, of its universe of itself. So you become the universe of just you. So when you sit in a chair, right? You're not sitting in its consciousness. You're not sitting in its awareness. You're not sitting in this operation. You're just sitting in a chair and nothing else. When you live in the cycles into all formation system, you come into some all that is, that's all it is. You're just looking at the table, that's all the table, and that's what it is. I created the table, but the table itself, I understand it's its own consciousness, but I brought it in. So it's actually getting that position to all levels of me now. Okay, so it's just a table, nothing else. Because you know exactly where you are in the virtual reality of you. So when you're looking at things, you're like, wow, this is powerful stuff. And I want to keep reminding you guys to get out of the structure and out of routine. Because you literally don't have to do anything. The body now is just coming back to what it already knows of who it is. And for you guys to come into that, you don't want to override your setting attraction. Okay? Because it confuses you of just existing. It overlaps everything of you in coexisting. Getting out of the coexistence of the body is coming into line center locations that doesn't put you in confusion through all of the you just creating in position to process you and travel. Okay? So getting out of the coexistence gets you in position locations and settings. You will always put you in attractions of you just existing. So it doesn't change anything anomaly. It doesn't change anything of time, right? So it's very important what you're doing through frequencies. It's very important what you do through time. It's very important what you do through measure and scale. It's very important what you're doing through schematics and primer. You're setting that up and you're planting that through manifestation abundance. Okay? Manifestation is the mind alteration settings when you come into answering patterns. So it's trying to get you to understand how modification of its networks, knowing exactly how to use its intelligence to its formation lines and settings. It processes you how to use your codification system through your system. So it gets you a lot more balance in what you're doing through travel, right? It helps you and guides you. But see, there is no help, there is no guide. You're just identifying who you always are, living in the virtual reality of itself. And what you created, okay, is what you aren't. And that's basically, you don't know the world you're in until you understand the world that you always are. So if you can identify yourself of the intel and understand the body of its intel, the intel understands why it's in a body, understands why it has a body. And once it understands it has a body, it understands its game. And what it understands its game, it's not in a game. It understands it's a game of himself or herself or the child of the boy or the girl, right? The one thing we have to start identifying is how to use our imagination. How to use imagination, how to get into purification set, how do we get into drawing, how do we get into schematics? By routine? No, I showed you in that position. There's no thinking at all. I could do anything in travel and bring anything in set positions. It's not bringing things to life, it's just bringing it to what it always is. It's virtual reality of itself in travel. It's just a cube, right? But you see it on different angles, see? You see it on different angles, see? And that's the illusion of itself. Right? It's traveling on its own. So imagine on its frames, millimeters per second, how it's just constantly, what's that? That's something came in. So, you know, it's showing exactly what its own consciousness setting to travel, right? Bring it back home in sequence, which is your fail-safe, put position location of balance, right? So it's a high single lines of grounds, okay? Travels point lines of graph, center operation line sequence, and face recognition and setting. Inside travel, in point lines, 2 line signals, 3 ground centers, and overline cross located inside box. That's all it is, right? But you see it as a cube. I see it as this. So nothing ever stops flowing. Nothing ever stops going. Everything's constantly moving. Everything has to keep moving. But for you to identify that is to really understand where you are. You never left your virtual reality at all. It's the mind you got to get in balance with. And what you see through provision and what you see through perspective is how you see everything through space and time. This helps you in so many ways and forms to get you in position location to its system to really understand how to control your minds of where you are of seconds, minutes, and hours in frame, right? Framing counts the countabilities and screen adaptations of flux of a line, how a computer aligns the signals. 4 centers of travel. That's got 4 directions and arrows of indications. 4 settings, right? But if I change the angle, look at that, another 4 setting. Change another angle, another 4 setting, right? Another angle, another 4 setting. Okay, you all see the arrows, they're still there, right? So if there's one arrow missing or one line signature missing, you're off position of travel. All right, so when you send it out, you're not sending the right information through frequencies. Right? That's what the conscious is showing you. Awareness is where it's supposed to be attractions, right? If I had a 0 line ground center, so 2 point lines of graph and 4 signals, are we there in position? We've got lines and settings, right? So we just check and make sure 4 settings of north, east, west, and south. Then you can send it out through set positions, all right? Bring it back home, back in frequency, back in pale. Now we're good, right? If I color it in red, sending it sequence, red. Color this in red, okay? You see it in red, right? Still in red? Yes, it is. Still in red? Yes, it is. There's a reason why you have to check all lines of 4. But you're doing direct and redirect all lines in 1, right? So bring it back in sequence, back in panel. There it is in travel communications. Didn't disappear, it's still there, right? Let's bring in blue or green, right? Green is never green. Green's all different colors of green, okay? And let's bring in blue. And let's bring in yellow. Okay, let's see if anything changes, which means your modification system teleporting your system of travel into mind manipulation system through intent. Is it all there in traction? Yes, it is. All right. Now I'm going to change the angle. Still there, right? Still there? Yep. And still there. Now we can continue. Now you can manifest and create. See? There you go. Now you continue on. So air indication lines, box frame. Does it like that in travel? Right? Maybe this doesn't like this, right? Maybe that's not supposed to be there, right? So let's change the angles. See, it's much easier when you're seeing the traction centers of balance, what you're doing in set positions, locations, and systems. Very simple to understand these things. Now let's bring the indication lines of 3 lines of flux. And then we'll overcross locations of 3 travels and point lines of graph. Center core line centers, electrical line, telepathy wave signals, and 4 travel communications. Okay? Bring it back home in sequence, back in panel, back in operation. That's where it wants to be in its original design. And that's what it is to its own consciousness. And then you constantly see the face recognition of time. Okay? This created all this. That's the consciousness of awareness. You brought it in frame, you brought it in through attraction, so it's just showing you how powerful it is of its own consciousness and settings. Okay? So I just want you guys to identify these things. Just because you see a box doesn't mean it's a box. You can't lock yourself in a 3-dimensional box line or a 5th dimension or a 7th dimension because you're limiting your stat. It's attractions, right? The box is not that. The box is this. That's the box. It sees in 2 different angles. Now the box is doing this, the creating. So the box is showing me what it wants to show you, how powerful it is of its own system, travel. If I change the angles, it changes the structure of design. Setting lines of sequence, setting core centers, and X8000 coming out through travel. Right? Setting wall lines, screen lines, adaptation, structure of the building. Right? So it's climbing up the wall now. Set travel. 2 travel, 3 travel, point lines of graph, energetic lines, 1 rotation, service, and travel communications. Right? And if I change the angle again, you can see in a different angle. Everything is traveling, right? But everything's always traveling. I just want you guys to get confused how you see it through structure of design line. Okay, but it's very powerful. Now let's bring it back home in sequence, where it's supposed to be in travel. Boom. Right where it's supposed to be. Right? So you don't get confused when you're drawing things. If something's off signal, you understand the structure of design is off signal, which means you're offsetting. So you don't understand how to modify your systems and travel. 4 box frames, 3 centers of travel, see? Is that finished? Are you finished with that? Okay. Is it finished? Okay. Do you understand what's going on in travel? Okay. It tells you exactly what it is and what it is and what it always is. Its full structure of its own design. Right? How it travels its own system inside, outside, and travel communications. Right? Sending cross angles. Everything's all communication system of travel. Right? So it's about understanding what you're doing within set position. Okay? That's why you guys have your fail-safes. You know exactly what's going on in set positions. So in that indication system, let's get in the centers of travel. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Okay. Let's send in sequence here. Let's travel point lines of graph and a simulate. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, we're going to put 6 there. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Where's 5, right? Set lines of travel. Set sequence lines of panel. Where is the 5? Where is the 5? Right there. See? See, the thing is, you got to get out of position and stop titling and labeling everything. Just because you can't see the 5 doesn't mean it's not there. It's always there. You just have to see it on a different angle. See? So it's an E factors over 4, 3 line cycles over 5 over 1. And if I change it again, what do you see? 1, 4, 4, 2, set position of what? Setting attractions. 6. Look at that. 1, 4, that's a 1 line, 4, 4, into 7 line or 2 line, in position of 6 line. So everything the letters, numbers, shades, and symbols is constantly changing its frame. So, like I said, where's the 5? It's there. You just don't see it on this angle, right? But you definitely see it in all positions of this angle and travel. There's the 5. See what I'm saying? You got to go beyond the mind line. That's getting out of square root, square triangulation, square pi, and 3 centers of travel in a triangulation flux. Okay? And then basically you get in position locations and setting. So it's the same thing location of 7, 8, and 9, and it's 11. Okay, we got 7, 8, 9, right? And we got 11. Okay, 7, 8, 9, but where's 10? Right? 10 there. Where's 10? 10 not there. Is 10 there? Okay. So, is 10 there? See 10? No? No? So, where's 10? 10's got to be there somewhere. Okay? Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there, because it's always there. But understand how to see it on 4 different angles and settings, or 6 angles, or 12 angles, 24 lines of communication lines of pi. Right? So the set position of the 10-line sequence is setting lines of travel, is on standby. Right? It's there, you just can't see it. And once you reach a higher frequency, then you'll see it through illumination graph or anything that indicates the system lines of travel. But it's always, always there. It's never left the virtual reality of its system. But see, here's the thing. If we skip lines of anomaly into 1, 2, and we get into 5, and then we get into 8. So what's missing? We're missing 3. Okay, same lines of travel. Okay, we're missing 4. Okay, setting lines of sequence. Okay, and we're missing 6 and 7. Okay, here's in travel communications. Setting lines of communications. There's the 7. Okay. Amazing how we come into that frame lines that communicates the system off the travel. It's incredible how you see it in all different angles and travel communications and settings. All right? That's what you have to come into, is all of your imagination system. Right? Playing the mechanisms of view is the inner force location to its outer force line that puts all process of communication system, how you see letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols in that positions. If we see triangulation lines, we see a triangulation of all different levels of setting, a sequence of travel. Okay, the triangulation is just going to 4 different levels of travel, right? And then it crosses angles to another triangulation and another position lines of setting. So the triangle is just traveling to different locations. There's this security, there's this defense, there's this ground center location, and it's travel. Okay, in set position of the communication. Right? So that's all it is, really. Basically getting that in that communication system to truly understand how to use that into the virtual reality of itself through modifications. All right? So I hope you guys had fun. And that's set lines of travel. We can coordinate through lines of Q&A. Unison, get a ground center location with settings and operates lines of Coliseum, level C. Adios.